MacVoices is supported by ATTO. If you are creating content with your Mac, you can add intelligence and performance to your network workflow with ATTO. ATTO Thunderbolt and host bus adapters are designed for collaboration, like graphic design and video editing. Find out more at atto.com. Welcome to MacVoices from AltConf and WWDC in San Jose. I'm Chuck Joyner. The one, the only, Kelly Guimont is with me. Kelly, it's good to see you.
It's good to be here, Chuck. I'm really glad we got to chat.
So shall we share the fact that we had a power failure yesterday and we're having to redo this?
Let's not talk about that part.
Okay, we won't tell them that. Okay.
Forward always.
Yes, exactly. So what are you doing here at AltConf and WWDC?
Oh, well, I was going to say, I was walking by and you put a mic in my face. I don't know.
Well,
that's what happened.
Yeah.
I'm here covering AltConf and WW for Mac Observer and interviewing developers for the Daily Observations podcast. I'm also here just, sort of the networking and getting to catch up with all the people and that are all in the same place at the same time. And the same kind of stuff that we used to do at Macworld that we're continuing to do at MacTalk. So.
And we've talked about this with several guests, the importance of getting together in person and having those unintentional, unplanned collisions of people. I mean, like we put together a group for dinner last night that was completely random and ad hoc, and we ended up having a great time and exchanging some new and interesting ideas.
It was, I don't think we could have tried to assemble a group of people and gotten, as interesting and different of a conversation as what we ended up with yesterday. And also the opportunity for meetups and to meet new people, find out more about what other folks are up to. And, there's people around here with prototypes of hardware and I can hand it to you and you can pick it up and hold it, and is it heavy, is it light, is it a nice color, somebody's headphones, are they comfortable, different things like that you can't get that experience no matter how many pictures you post on Twitter, or whatever. So that's part of what I enjoy, and getting to find out what people are working on, what's interesting about what we've seen and things like that. So I like the people aspect of it. Even before we get to the party aspect of it. So.
Well, the party aspect is always fun. But yeah, I know it's interesting, the developers that have come up to me. I've been placed under NDA 5 times in this hallway. Let me show you this, but you can't talk about it.
But
okay.
Yeah.
And, and it's well, that's really interesting. Have you thought about this? Well, no, they hadn't seen it that way. And that doesn't mean I'm any genius software developer. It just means, okay, I have a particular use case in mind for your app,
right.
And have you thought about that? Sometimes they have, sometimes they haven't.
Right.
So it's those kind of interactions that I think make this so valuable. Plus, it's just fun to see friends and meet new ones.
Exactly, and in fact, part of to your point about use cases. Yesterday, I was on a panel about diversity, and building for diversity, hiring for diversity, and I know casually to start with, not even getting as far as accessibility features or anything like that. One of the things that I brought up was I'm a left-handed person. I use my phone in my left hand all the time. Lots of times the controls are on the right because someone who mostly holds their phone in their right hand built the app and wants everything where their thumb can reach it. And mine doesn't reach all the way that way in that particular application. And there were a number of people in the crowd who really just sort of wow, I never thought about it like that. And that's even before you get to what if someone who's colorblind, or what if someone who's completely blind or legally blind or impaired in some way is also trying to use that same application. So it was interesting to get to have that conversation, and the audience got engaged, which was also good, to talk about, ask some questions, and I think probably the word I've heard the most, I know it's only Wednesday afternoon, but in the first half of the week, the word hands down I have heard the most from anybody is accessibility. So and part of that is because we saw that in the next version of iOS, it's being pulled up to the top level of the settings app, which is fantastic, and I think there's starting to be more conversation around that and what accessibility means. And on Mac OS, there are certain things that are using accessibility in order to get to do what it is that they want to do or need to do those particular applications. And I think I think there's a lot to be said for just raising the level of that conversation and making it a much more common thing for people to consider.
So a couple things I want to comment on and discuss here. First of all, welcome to the Left-Handers podcast, because we both share those frustrations. But your point about your example of using a left-handers in a diversity discussion is really interesting, because so often diversity, I think, right now is being talked about. And diversity, by the way, is really important here at AltConf. I mean, they have a code of conduct that is very specific and very important to them. But diversity usually means race, gender, sexual preference, and there are a lot of different ways to look at diversity. Just like you said with the left-handed, whether colorblind. I mean, we can just go right on down the line, and it becomes a bunch of check boxes, and it's arguably maybe impossible to tick them all, but just keeping them in mind, I think, helps a lot.
Well, and the reason that I had that example is because I use an app called Twitterific. Hi, Gad. I use an app called Twitterific, and Gad Mayhew was the lead developer on it, and his mom is left-handed, and so he has a left-handed checkbox in the options because he had someone in mind when he was building that and laying it out, and what does it look like and how does it work. And so that's where that came from. And like it never even occurred to me as a left-handed person that was a thing that I should have. And part of why I bring it up is because it's not like there's a lot of politics around what hand you prefer over the other, and there's not a lot of there's not like all the baggage that goes along with why doesn't your app support some group of people, because like you wouldn't know unless you sat next to me at dinner that I was left-handed for the most part. So for me, it makes a good sort of apolitical example so that you don't have to get into a whole conversation of the politics behind race and gender and accessibility, like accessibility options. So there doesn't have to be any sort of like emotional attachment to that conversation. It's just my hand is only this big. I use this much of it for my phone. My thumb can only go this far. You put all your controls on that side for you, which means for me it's useless. And as everybody knows about the App Store, just because I can't use your app doesn't mean I can't do whatever it is your app enables me to do. I will just go get the other app that does that, or the other app, or the other app, et cetera, et cetera. So whatever it is I want to do, I can be reasonably convinced that you are not the only game in town. And if you're not going to support me, I'll find someone who will. Wow.
A little small accident, but everything's under control.
Okay, everything's good. So, like, I don't have, like, in order to be an app that is usable by as many people as possible, to have the largest, the biggest possible market, it should be something everyone can use. So I've been really interested to see a lot more conversation around that this year. Last year there was some talk about it, about all the different kinds of things that you can do to make your app something that as many people as possible can use, and it was really it's been interesting to just sort of walk by people having conversations and hear something about accessibility or voiceover or assisted use, guided access, and hearing that stuff just walking through the hall as people are in breaks between sessions and things. So it's been a very interesting thing, because I think there's a lot of evolution that's going to happen there. I think that might be the next thing to watch as far as like trends and stuff that's getting developed.
And accessibility, I mean, so much of the time on MacVoices we talked about productivity. Accessibility doesn't just have to mean your ability to use the app, but your ability to use the app the way you want it to. The ability to take advantage of some things that are labeled accessibility that could probably be labeled something else, but that's where they landed. Mm-hmm. And so, just because you may not have a challenge that might be addressed, you should still poke around in those settings, because there's some amazing things in there that apply to everyone. Or could apply to everyone if they chose to implement them or turn them on. Yeah,
and another one that I sort of think of, like when people talk about accessibility, like if you look at, for example, my stepfather, he's not deaf, but it is sometimes difficult for him to hear. and particularly television, and he likes to watch TV. So he has a pair of those headphones that you hook up to the TV so that you can hear it at whatever volume you like, which may not be the same as the volume of the people around you or the people in the next room. And so he has a pair of those, so he puts them on, and when he puts them on, he can't hear his iPhone text message go off. So, like his daughter's texting him, or I'm texting him or whatever, and it takes him hours to get back because he doesn't know the phone went off. So I told him, did you know you can have the flash on your camera light up when you get a text message, and then you would at least see, the light would catch your eye and you would see that somebody's trying to get hold of you. I didn't know that. How do I do that? And he's able-bodied. He can see, he can hear for the most part. You don't think of him as a person who would necessarily benefit from accessibility, and it's those sorts of things that are also helpful to people that once that stuff is more publicly known, just make it easier for everyone to do what it is they want to do.
What kind of other discussions did you have in the diversity panel? Because I think it's always interesting to see how that rears its head in this particular community.
Well, we had somebody who asked a question about how do you have a non-emotional conversation, if you want to champion this in your organization, and, how do you not make it emotional? I know it's the right thing to do, but how do I make that pitch to my boss? Because there's not it costs X dollars to do the right thing means we're going to do it. So how do you breach that conversation? And and a lot of that is culture, like having a boss that you can have that conversation with, and being able to present some quantifiable information, but also knowing that value is not always something that fits in a spreadsheet, and reputation isn't something that always fits in a cell. When you're trying to balance something. So being more aware of those sorts of things and being able to figure out the best way to communicate that. And also talking a little bit about hiring for diversity and having different perspectives on your team. Someone who's a mom is going to have a very different view of whatever that thing is that you built than someone than maybe even a woman who isn't a mom, or a guy on the team, or somebody who comes from a big family, or somebody who comes from, is an only child. And everybody's perspective and the life that everyone led before they got to where they are right now on the team with you is all very different and can all be very interesting. And if you actively seek people with those different perspectives from your own, you're just going to end up with better stuff. We see that time and time again. So that's part of where that I think that's becoming part of the conversation too, is how do we get these perspectives? How do we go find the parts how do we go find people that have something different from us? I don't even know how to start doing that, and having that conversation too.
Interesting. So this would not be a WWDC conversation if we didn't talk about Apple's announcements. Yes. So I'm going to give you two. Okay. Pick your favorite two.
My two favorites?
Your two favorites, no matter how large or how small.
Okay, so I'm going to preface this by saying that this was the thing I told you earlier that you thought was interesting, and that is, I think that that next May, when we're gearing up for what WW 2020 looks like, what do we think Apple's going to do? What's going to be in the next version of the operating systems? I think that that the proportional impact is the inverse of what we saw in the keynote. When you go back and look at the keynote, you will see a lot of time was spent on Minecraft Earth, which is cool, but is not necessarily going to be a day-to-day thing for loads of people. Yes, it's a lot of people. It is the most popular video game. I understand that, but it's not, capital E everybody. It's not for capital P people, the people. So they spent a tiny bit of time talking about the disposable email addresses and sign in with Apple as opposed to sign in with Facebook or sign in with Google. And I think that's going to be one of the biggest things that ends up coming out of this. It's not big right now because nobody has it, nobody's building it, nobody's implementing it in anything yet, but it will be. And I think that's probably the single biggest, and it got a very small amount of time in the keynote. The other thing they did spend a lot of time on, for good reason, and that's the Mac Pro. And part of why I like that, why I think that was the biggest, is because I almost feel like Apple did it so that people would have to complain about something else. See how we made this amazing video card that will stream video of every live cam on the planet at the same time, you can install 2. And I think part of that, like I've been thinking a lot about like the new Mac Pro and the refinements that they've made. Like the handles don't kill your hands if you did need to pick it up or roll it around in some fashion like the old one did. And this one you can put wheels on, which is amazing as a person who had to wheel cartloads of those things around and rotate them through. Like, first of all, I looked it up, they're 48 pounds.
Whoa.
The old ones were. I don't know how much the new one weighs, but the new one comes with wheel. You have wheels. The wheels may be another $1,000. I don't know, but you can get wheels for it, and it will. I'm assuming it will move very nicely because the wheels have been engineered within an inch of their life. So, the thing that, like, in thinking about that, it's all the people who said, "Oh, I want Pro." Shut up.
Yeah.
You wanted a high-end machine, and I understand that there are people that have outgrown Mac OS because there wasn't hardware that could support what it is that they did. But those people aren't the people who are complaining the loudest about not having anything. Those are people who are quietly telling coworkers at work or colleagues from another company or whatever, yeah, I had to move to some other sort of workstation because my Mac can't keep up anymore, whatever Mac that may be. And so I think some of that comes from the iMac being considered almost like the toy computer. Like,
when it first came out, yeah, I mean,
because
there was a certain perception.
Because and that's because it was cute. It came in colors. It literally looked like a gumdrop, and and they gave it, fruit flavored names. So mine was grape. I did have a grape iMac. So, if you wanted to do real computing, you bought a tower, and then Apple took, there isn't a tower anymore, and I think that there's a certain number of people who want to be pro users, who are dismissing like the iMac Pro, the iMac 5K, which are reasonably beefy machines as machines go. And I know that they're not upgradable, and I know that when I'm hearing people complain about it, what they're complaining about is things like horsepower and memory and drive space, things like, and I can't put in a graphics card and things like that. And some of that stuff is valid, but as far as like straight horsepower in something, like the iMac, the iMac Pro is one of the most important, one of the beefiest processors you can get. Like, even if you had to go get a different kind of workstation or something, like, you're still not going to get like a chip that's twice as fast as the one that's in the iMac Pro or anything like that. So I feel like sometimes it gets overlooked, and the Mini's been updated, and part of the reason I think it's so important that the iMac or that the Mac Pro is one of the biggest deals is because I'm hopeful that everything that went into turning that computer into what it is in some fashion, like the learning of it, not necessarily the manufacturing or the products itself or that actual monster graphics card or anything like that, but that what went into developing that stuff and refining that stuff will trickle down to the rest of the product line.
I agree with you. I mean, I recognize that for some users, and I do think it's a small subset of users, that there is room for a small tower of some kind, mainly for the graphics card issue.
Right.
But beyond that, I mean, you can get some amazing graphics cards in iMacs,
right.
And so I have to wonder what the percentage is that really not wants it but needs it. Because otherwise, I mean, if you spec out a Mac Mini right now and spec out something similar on a 27-inch 5K, the prices are about the same. You almost get the monitor for free.
Yeah,
so why wouldn't you do that?
Exactly. And I think that's another piece that nobody has really talked about. Like, yes, people are talking about $1,000 stand. Not a lot of people are talking about Apple getting back in the display game. Because how many years has it been that the only display you could get from Apple came with a computer strapped to the back? Because the only way you got Apple Glass was if you bought an iMac.
But it is beautiful glass, to be clear.
Yes.
It's not a compromised glass.
No. But if all you need is a display, then why do I want the one that has a whole computer on it? So there's a certain amount of that, I think. And so, like, that was something I don't think got as much attention as maybe it should have, like, in the aftermath of everybody talking about it. But also, like, there's a certain amount of evolution that has happened since that was a common thing. Like, you don't need a new graphics card every 6 months anymore because they're just not evolving that quickly. And maybe it's once a year, maybe it's 18 months, 24 months. And I understand there are needs for new graphics cards as more horsepower becomes available and, existing technology becomes more efficient. But, it used to be that you could double the amount of RAM on your graphics card, the amount of memory that it used, the number of polygons it could process at a time. Like, that number would double by the time you needed to afford a new graphics card, and that's not what's happening anymore. There's a lot of maturity in the component level hardware. At least in the stuff that I've followed, I'm not super deep into it like I used to be when I had a machine like that I was regularly swapping pieces out of. But like in sort of looking at like what's out and what's coming out and what's just been announced, and because there's always sort of that break, like there's normal people prices for things, and then there's this huge gap, and then all of a sudden like that's twice the money that I want to spend on a graphics card or whatever, and there's that break. And so I always look up here, like what does this look like compared to what this looks like, and those numbers and that stuff is a lot more static than it used to be. So it does change, but it doesn't change at the rate that it used to.
Well, and if you really need that graphics card, you can buy one of the new Mac Pros, and keep the rest of the specs down. Put your graphics card in, and you're fine to go. So yeah, you're going to pay a little bit of a premium, but at some point, and we all do it. That we all want the machine that fits our particular needs.
Right.
And Apple is still a business, and they've got to build for the most of the people, and then try to figure out how to fill in the gaps. And so much of the connectivity they built into the iMacs and to the Mac Minis now, I mean, you can add a lot more storage and a lot better storage through just the Thunderbolt and USB-C connectivity than you could with the old Mac Pro. So don't overlook that.
Well, and I think what people are complaining about is slightly inaccurate, because it's not, I want more horsepower, I want more memory. It's modularity. I want to be the upgradability of what those towers used to look like. The blue and white with the little loop on the side, and then pop it down, get your hands in there, do whatever you need to do. It was beautiful. I remember when they first came out and making the pilgrimage down to MacForce and getting to see, do you have one? Will you open it? And being so excited to see for the first time how easy it was to get into the side of that computer. And like, I had a PowerBook 1400, and I'm not dating myself at all by talking about this. To get into it, you could upgrade a number of parts, and you slid off the speaker grill across the top of the computer where the touch bar is now, lifted up the keyboard, and there were the guts of your computer. It was like a Lego laptop, and it was amazing. And I upgraded a number of things in that because that was how I was stretching my Mac budget. So I have $200, so I can put a faster modem in it. I have a couple, I've saved up, and I can put a bigger hard drive in it. I've saved up, not a new computer's worth of money, but it made it so that I could get an extra year or 2 or 3 out of that machine. And I think that's what people are complaining about is I bought a Mac Pro, or, I bought a Mac Tower, a Yikes or a Sawtooth or whatever, blue and white, and I got that so that I could swap out, so I could add more memory, so I could add a new graphics card, so I could put in a bigger hard drive, and go through a couple of those evolutions until I could afford, once that chassis is no longer usable, then I go buy a new chassis, and then I go through a couple of iterations of that because it's more economical to squeeze the life out of it with that small amount of money that gives me another year or 2 or more of life. And I think that's what it is that people are actually complaining about when they bemoan the lack of the Mac Pro tower, because that used to be the Pro machine.
Yeah, but okay, so while we're here in San Jose, we're in a bit of an echo chamber because everybody here, probably almost everybody, has had their hands inside a Mac at some point in their time. And if you step back and look at who's buying the iMacs, and sure, there are people here that are buying them, but there are also a whole lot more people out there that don't know how to get inside a computer. They have no desire to get inside a computer. They would much rather pay Apple's price for RAM than call somebody like OWC and save a significant amount of money because they're afraid to, or they don't know how to, and they don't want to.
Right.
And so that's who Apple is building these machines for.
Right.
And but now for the people that really do have the need to do some of what you're talking about, they've built a machine that chassis is going to be a long time before it goes out of date.
And I don't think, like I told you, at dinner last night, like, people aren't buying this computer. Companies are buying this computer. ILM is buying these. I'm totally blanking on the name of the Game of Thrones people, but the dragon budget, at HBO is going towards some of these, so they can render a dragon on one machine instead of 5, or whatever it looks like. And like, I understand the modularity stuff in the laptops, right? So that PowerBook that I could pop open and swap stuff out, that was a 6.5-pound computer, which at the time was revolutionary. No computer was that light, which I now have to air quote in 2019. And I understand that if you glue it in instead of the other, you get a thinner, lighter machine, and the Apple's always looking at how to do that and how to make something more portable. And I understand that, and I do not begrudge them that. But I think that when people are complaining about it, they're not complaining about what they actually mean. And so, but it is the modularity for people who want that. But I also think Apple is doing a lot, because by not making them modular, they can also sometimes be a little less expensive. And it's a little easier to use that $1,000 laptop for 3 or 4 years, given the way the OS evolves and how far back hardware gets supported. Like Catalina is going to run on my computer, which is 4 years old, 5 years old. My computer's 5 years old. It's going to run on my old laptop, and it's going to run on everything newer. It's going to run on the new computer my mom got last year, and everything in between. And Apple's been very conscientious about making sure that people are getting the life out of those devices, even if they don't have to, because you used to have to upgrade RAM in order to keep up with system requirements or have enough hard drive space to install the new version of the operating system, because it took more than the last one did. And those things have largely been eliminated by other things that Apple has done. Some of that stuff gets solved in software.
At the end of the day, somebody's going to complain about pretty much anything. But I feel like this was a good, solid keynote. There were announcements sort of across the board. I don't know if there was anything revolutionary outside of the Mac Pro, but certainly a lot of evolutionary stuff that's going to flow down to the user, and flow down pretty quick when we see Catalina come out, when we see iOS 13 actually come out, the new versions of tvOS and watchOS. iPadOS. Even the HomePod got some mentions about, okay, you're going to be able to do different things with your HomePod.
And see, that's another one of the inverse ones. Like, oh, by the way, multi-user support on the HomePod. Let's move to the next. No, come back, because I want to hear more about that.
Yeah.
And hopefully there's some good sessions this week about that we will find out more about. Because multi-user is a thing that people have begged for forever on the iPad, which while is a personal device, is not necessarily as personal a device as like an iPhone. Like, yes, I could use your iPhone, maybe, but it's not the same as like I have an iPad and I hand it to you so you can whatever. Right. That's a very different experience, and multi-user on the iPad is very interesting. Multi-window, no, I don't remember what they call it. It's not Windows.
Slide over.
Multi-apps.
Multi-apps. Okay.
Yeah, because I keep thinking of them as windows.
Yeah.
So like you can have more than one window open at a time. I'm interested in that because I feel like iPadOS should have come a little closer on the heels of the USB-C iPad, and it would have proven that Apple is taking everybody seriously who's making a way to turn an iPad into their primary device.
But we had this discussion the other night. In some ways, I'm kind of glad it didn't, because apparently it wasn't ready. Or it wouldn't,
I didn't want it when it was ready, but I feel like in this case Apple's a little behind the consumer curve a lot. I didn't know how much I wanted to use my phone to pay for stuff until Apple said you can use your phone to pay for stuff. And I think that this is the same sort of thing. People like Federico Viticci over at Mac Stories, who is all iPad all the time, as much as he can be. And and other people who have done a whole lot with things like shortcuts and other types of automation available to them to route around the problems that they're trying to solve by not having all of the stuff that you get by having a Mac. And I feel like Apple got there after all of those sorts of people had gone and been very public about what they were doing and how they were getting it done. And so I wish that it had kicked off sooner, so that it could have come out sooner, so that it would have been ready sooner than it was. That's really all it comes down to.
Well, but at the end of the day, it's coming. Now we know when it'll get here, and now people can make their decisions based on that.
Yes.
We're all kind of greedy, you know.
Well, it's because they showed us so much awesome stuff.
Well,
I mean, that's, to be fair, look at all these amazing things.
Yeah. We all want them tomorrow.
Yes, and I think iPadOS is another one. Like, they did talk, they did spend a good amount of time on it, but I think overall it's going to be one of the big things that comes out, like the security stuff. Sign in with Apple and all of that. Like, I think as more people get a hold of it, as more people figure out what it is and what it can do, and start kicking open those doors, that moment with iPadOS on Monday felt to me like when they announced the original iPad. Like, when I watched that presentation, when I went through when they walked through what they were doing with the iPad, all I saw in it was potential. And like, in my mind, all the people I knew who wanted more screen than their phone but less screen than their laptop in order to do something useful on the go in whatever fashion that was. And I feel like iPadOS is going to do the same thing. It's going to be the next big evolution of, wasn't it iOS 7 where everything got redesigned? Like, this is the iOS 7 for the iPad.
Yeah.
Because like, first we got it, and then maybe it should have a camera, and then beyond that it's been sort of evolutionary features. And I'm hopeful that iPadOS, admitting this is a different interaction paradigm, that this is a different use case in most ways on your iPad than what you have on your phone, and and what it is that people are doing with it and what people want to be doing with it, that this is going to be something that really kicks that off. So everything I saw in that was just like when it made its debut. It's all potential. It all looks like, Apple's finally realizing what it is they've got on their hands, because all these people who took it and ran with it have shown them this is what it could be. And now Apple is taking that and evolving that in order to take things further. And I'm really excited to see that evolution.
So we will continue this, I'm sure, for the next multiple months, as we find out more and learn about it and what the capabilities are. And I'm sure what some of the detractors will say, and some of that will be accurate, but, it just takes time. So folks can find you at the Mac Observer's Daily Observations podcast.
Yes.
They can find you where else?
You can also occasionally find me on the Incomparable Podcast Network. And I have my own show with my friend Mike Rose from the unofficial Apple weblog. We continued to podcast after that ended. So it's called The After Show with Mike and Kelly. And you can also find me as Verso on micro.blog. And kind of here, there, and everywhere. Occasionally somebody named Chuck Joyner will put a microphone in my face and broadcast that on the internet. So you can find me there too.
Once in a while. Kelly, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for the time.
Thanks so much for having me on, Chuck.
Folks, we'll have more from AltConf and WWDC in San Jose. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices, or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.